Hello, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Queer Magic Podcast. I'm your host, Luis Cornejo, a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California, specializing in queer mental health. I have a special guest today who I'm going to let introduce themselves. And for this episode, we are going to be having a conversation, a planned conversation, but I'll share a little bit more. But go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Jesse Escalante. I identify as he, him, his. I'm queer, Latin, and I am a social worker in San Francisco as well as a contemporary dancer. And I'm really excited to be here. So thank you for having me, Luis.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Thank you, Jesse, for joining. And as many of you might know, Jesse, we've collaborated before many times in a lot of different media types, whether it's video or just other podcasts. And I'm so excited to have Jesse back. And we did have a planned topic. And I know I had shared that with you, Jesse, earlier, and I sent it to you in an email and everything. But I've actually been thinking a lot about not just things that I've seen on your social media, but also myself. And so I was hoping that we could maybe switch it up a little bit. And really what I was hoping to chat with you about was, navigating the world, right? As queer folks, something that I personally have been struggling with these last few days and, in general is really how sometimes it can feel like the world is not very welcoming, right? And
Mm,
what I mean by that is, as a queer person, uh, not just continuously growing, but also learning to find their way, and how they express themselves and just the way that they want to be seen and how I want to exist. I've been really, I think, down some days when I struggle with not feeling very welcomed, right? Or even people's reactions, as a queer person. And I don't think we talk about that too much. We generally speak about the positives about showing up and being authentic and being ourselves and being queer and finding, our magic, right? As queer folks, but not so much about how hard it is some days, or maybe even exhausting to have to live in a world that's not made for us and oftentimes not always welcoming. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I was really hoping that we could maybe chat a little bit about that.
yeah, no, I think that's a really great topic and it's really important. I think this is so interesting you're bringing this topic up because I'm actually reading a book that I think really ties into this topic. It is called Why Are Faggots Afraid of Faggots? And it's a bunch of personal essays, actually. So it's not like a linear storyline, but it's a bunch of collection of personal essays amongst people that identify as queer, femme, faggots, however you want to call it. And they're all about how these queer individuals navigate internalized homophobia and racism and femphobia and fat phobia amongst the gay community and how they have navigated not feeling accepted amongst people that we call our brothers and sisters or part of our community. And so I think it's so interesting to have this topic because people would automatically assume we're talking about just cisgendered straight folks, right? Those are the
Mm-hmm.
ones that are not accepting of us. Those are the ones that are putting us in danger. And I was reading this book to my friend, and we were saying, like, gay men are kind of sometimes can be like those middle school girls where like
Mm-hmm.
they use their words to hurt you, and those words like they sting and they can leave some severe scars that run deeper than a physical wound. And so I'm really interested in having like that maybe holistic conversation where we're
Mm-hmm.
not just pretending that our community is safe and sacred and it's only straight cisgender people causing harm, but rather the pressure to subscribe to these norms that affects both queer and straight folks that
Mm-hmm.
perpetuates this harm towards people that are more expressive.
Absolutely. And first of all, I'm going to have to get that book from you. Well, we're going to share it with everyone
Yeah.
so people
Yeah,
can
well,
also
sure. I'll
find
give
it.
it to you. Don't worry. Yeah.
Perfect, perfect. No, and it's funny because it actually ties into our original topic, right? Because the topic that you and I had discussed was talking about how queer folks can also cause harm. People in the community, right, in the LGBTQ plus community can also cause harm, right? It does not it does not what is the word? I'm not even thinking about the actual word, but it does not mean that LGBTQ plus folks can't be racist or also hold on to a lot of these oppressive views as well. I'm glad that you tied that in because, for me, I think in the last few months, something that I've experienced and also possibly because of my transition to LA, I just relocated and obviously moving to a new place and reconnecting or meeting people can be a little bit challenging. But also being
Yeah.
in a new environment, right? As a queer person, I think that oftentimes we have to assess for safety, right? Not just physical, but also social, emotional. And I think for me, one of the things that I've noticed is how challenging it is sometimes to really want to really connect with other people, especially when you are queer and present a certain way. And you were mentioning a lot about gay men. I know for me, when I first came out, I identified as gay, and I still do sexuality wise. But something that I realized right away when I did come out was how hard it was to connect with other gay men. How often I felt unwelcomed or even criticized, right, for a lot of things, whether it was my weight or whether it was the clothing that I wore or whether it was just something else, right? And it did feel in a lot of ways like what you just shared, right? This almost like middle school gossip, mean girl kind of thing. And I personally often share about how I was bullied growing up, and especially in middle school. And so a lot of it almost came back, right? As I was
Hmm.
learning more about myself and trying to connect with people. And I shared this even before in the prior podcast that I called masculinity. And I talked a little bit about how I've often have felt unwelcome in
Hmm.
masculine spaces, right, or around men, and gay men being a part of that as well. Especially a lot of them who uphold a lot of the heteronormative, values and just systems, right, that they live in. And so for me, that was always something that I struggled with. And so I'm curious for you. You were mentioning this book and navigating these spaces. What has been your experience with that?
Yeah, I thank you so much for sharing your experiences on being bullied. I did hear your story in your podcast, and I really, really related to that actually because in middle school I was bullied for 3 years, and it was pretty severe. I experienced basically all types of abuse. It was physical, it was emotional, there was sexual abuse also happening in school. And, the faculty did nothing about it. The faculty knew this was happening. And, going to school every day felt so unsafe, and I really had no one to turn to. And I think because I had such a free spirit in high school and I came out and I was so confident, I kind of brushed the bullying aside, like that didn't affect me. I'm over it, and I think as I became an adult, I really realized how much that had actually impacted me, especially my awareness of my safety. I think when I walked into school, I automatically had to have my fight or flight response up, and I was in like survival mode because the bullying, especially the physical abuse, was really intense. And it's funny how that feeling often comes back to me when I do dress up or I do put on makeup or I do express myself in maybe a more flamboyant way. I have to assess, is it safe to go to a space looking like this? And am I putting myself in a position where I might receive some sort of backlash, whether that's side comments on the streets or maybe a physical altercation. And there have been many times in my life where I have felt that similar feeling of that 11-year-old walking into middle school, except I'm like a 20-year-old something adult, and this is the adult world, and I'm still feeling that exact same way. And I'm not here to like self-diagnose myself, but it feels like a little bit of like PTSD, where I am always just so hyper aware of how I present as a form of safety.
Absolutely. I definitely share a very similar story. Being bullied in middle school for me was was a horror. I remember waking up and not wanting to go to school, feeling very lonely, feeling very isolated, getting comments daily, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maricon, faggot. Someone would call me Juanga, and I didn't know who Juan Gabriel was at that point, so I wasn't even sure what they were trying to say to me. But I remember people making these comments, and it was every day. You know,
Yeah.
it not only did it impact my self-esteem, but it also kept me from really learning how to connect with others because I didn't trust people. I didn't feel safe. And then going home and being from a very religious and conservative family, there was no way that I could share with them what was going on, and least of all, what exactly it was that I was being bullied about. You know, so I went
Mm-hmm.
many years trying to figure that out on my own. You know, and as kids, right, we don't really understand the world, and it's it's a scary thing where we're supposed to depend on adults, and yet when we try to, or when we do think about it, it doesn't always, you know, happen the way it's supposed to. You know, I remember in middle school, I told one teacher, right, and this was an art teacher, and I expected them to be more understanding. And I remember sharing with them, and the one thing they said to me was, maybe you should act different. Maybe you shouldn't let, you know, if people are bullying you for a reason, maybe you shouldn't act that way. And basically saying, you know, you're feminine, you shouldn't act so feminine, people, you're gonna have a hard time. And
Yeah.
that was pretty much the gist of it. And I remember not getting any help whenever I complained about it, and most of the time administrators putting me on the spot, right? Like asking me in front of my mom, what are they saying to you? And me not being able to say anything, right? Out of fear, out of
Right.
this worry that if I said anything, then I wouldn't just get it at school. I'd probably get that shit at home, you know? And so from that, growing and going into college and learning to navigate a lot of these spaces where I kind of thought, well, you know, I came out. That was the hard part. It was such a shock to me that it actually wasn't, right? The harder part was really figuring out more about who I was, but also learning to, you know, that it wasn't always safe, even in spaces that I thought would have been safe, you know, being around other
Mm-hmm.
gay men and feeling exactly the same way, like you said, right? Showing up into these spaces and having this almost level of anxiety, right? Or even the looks. And I still get those, you know, very often. I might be walking down the street. I might go to a gay bar in WeHo, and people definitely stare, right? Make comments, you know, make judgments, criticisms. I think because I've had an opportunity to really heal through therapy and do a lot of that work, it's definitely shifted. And at the same time, this kind of stuff, you know, isn't something that just goes away, right? We carry, I think, a lot of it. And you were mentioning PTSD. And I think for me, at least in my work in therapy, a lot of it has felt very much like trauma, right? This
Mm-hmm.
very, debilitating experience sometimes in wanting to be seen, but feeling so scared of rejection, right? Or a literal fear, right? A social of any type of like harm, right? Social, emotional, or even physical.
Yeah. Um, you know, and I really relate to not even just thinking people are judging you, because I think there is a difference. We are all so worried about other people's opinions, and
Mm-hmm.
we are all so worried that people are judging us. And that's a real anxiety, and that's a real fear, because
Mm-hmm.
as humans, we want to be accepted, you know? And then there is the reality where people like knowingly judge you, like to your face. And that's when you become so hyper aware of how different you are. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that is so difficult, you know? It's like, I've heard this thing. It's like, why do people point out like your eating habits? Like, yeah, that's so rude, because then you start to notice how you're eating, and then you can't just eat comfortably, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that reminds me of like, why do people point out how feminine you are, or how your
Mm-hmm.
body isn't the social norm, or this or that? Because then you become aware of it, and you become so self-conscious about it. And I remember there was such a period of my life where I was so comfortable in my body, and I really didn't have any like shame about how my body looked or how I presented. And then I would start to get comments from other gay men about like,
Mm-hmm.
your body should look like this. I wish your body looked like
Mm-hmm.
that. And it
Mm-hmm.
to this day affected how I view myself in the mirror, because those words, like I said in the beginning of the podcast, have always stuck with me. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
remember I was actually having sex with this person, which is such a
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable state of being. You're literally naked, and it's so intimate.
Yeah.
And he looked at me like dead in the eye and was like, you know, I think you would be a lot more attractive if you were a little bit more muscular. And
Mm-hmm.
like, those words like have stuck with me to this day. And
Yeah.
it's those type of things that are so
Mm-hmm.
harmful, you know, and it's
Mm-hmm.
so sad because these are people that are brothers, there are sisters, there
Mm-hmm.
are non-binary siblings, and we
Mm-hmm.
all just want to be accepted by one another, and
Yeah.
we can do so much harm at the same time.
Absolutely, and that shit goes way beyond even just individual people. I mean, these are things that are pushed on us, right, by society, by media, by beauty standards, right? And then we just regurgitate this shit, like, with each other. And it's, as queers, we're not exempt from that. We still live in the world where these things are pushed on us, and many of us uphold these things even subconsciously sometimes without even noticing. I remember one of my first gay friends that I had, who I was very close to. They would always tell me, like, if you lost some weight, like, you would find a boyfriend and then you would be happy. And I just remember thinking, like, oh my gosh, like, how much I struggled to just show up a lot of times, feeling like people were already looking at me. And then having someone that I felt close to say that to me, right? And almost in a
Right.
way, like, it came from like a very concerning place. And it felt like, they're maybe saying this because they care about me. And yet, having had a history of struggling with body image and dealing with a lot of constant up and down, weight loss, weight gain, that shit, I think, has always stuck with me. And it wasn't just because they said it, it was literally because of a whole history behind it, right? Of being told your body is not good enough. Your body, it should look
Mm-hmm.
this way. If transformed into this, you would be more loved. People will accept you more. Yada 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 yada. This and that. And I remember that friendship was pivotal for me, mostly because it was my one of my first gay friends, right? One of the first experiences I had connecting with someone and actually feeling some sense of safety. That after it was over, I remember feeling so hurt and thinking about how maybe I shouldn't have, gay friends. Maybe I shouldn't really connect with the community. And a lot of anger, um, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of resentment, right? Because it wasn't just them saying that to me. I've heard it many, many times from many people, whether it was other men, that I had sex with or had intimacy with, or people that I was attracted to, or just people that I met. I mean, it was something that came up, right? Around bodies, around shame, even when it wasn't
Yeah.
said directly, So I think that there's definitely a lot of layers to it. And especially in the gay community, I think that there's so much there around bodies, right, and privilege, and also um, the way that people connect with one another, right? I mean, oftentimes, and it excludes, right, and also rejects a lot of people.
Hmm. You know, and I think, to be quite honest, there is a lot of truth in saying that if your body looks a certain way, you actually do benefit and you will get more
Mm-hmm.
acknowledgement from the community. You will
Mm-hmm.
get more praise. You are inherently more important. And I've seen that in so
Mm-hmm.
many different ways, you know. I've had to really change my relationship with social media where
Mm-hmm.
I really had to unfollow a lot of people that, yeah, maybe like we're friends or maybe we run into the same spaces and we'll have conversations, but like all you really post are like gym pictures of like your
Mm-hmm.
perfect body and like your perfect life. And that
Mm-hmm.
like, that's great for you and that adds nothing of value to like what I'm trying to look for. If I'm just on Instagram and Twitter and I'm just being triggered all day because it's just
Mm-hmm.
constant like perfect six pack abs, perfect
Yeah.
chest. It's just like all it does is it makes me feel horrible about myself. And so I really
Yeah.
had to set boundaries on social media. But I've
Mm-hmm.
also noticed like, you know, I'm also like really analytical like this.
Mm-hmm.
I've also noticed that like as I've kind of had to really monitor what I post on social media, you know, as a social worker and as a
Mm-hmm.
professional,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, like maybe like I don't get the same attention as like I used
Mm-hmm.
to, and like I would be posting maybe like
Mm-hmm.
some like sexual or like thoughty pictures, like a shirtless picture or something like that. Like it's just interesting to see how like algorithms also work on social media, like
Mm-hmm.
what kind of pictures a lot of your gay friends will like, and what kind of
Mm-hmm.
pictures your gay friends won't like.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had to like be okay with that. I'm a millennial, so I'm not gonna lie. The likes do bring some justification, whatever. Like,
Of course.
I'm human. I'm human. But it's like, yeah, if I were to be posting pictures of just like my body and stuff, I think like I would get like a lot more social media
Hmm.
attention than just like posting me in like makeup or just like in a nice outfit
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah, yeah, no, social media is a whole other thing, and it's so interesting you share that because I've had to do the same where I think for my own mental health and for my own sanity, there's been many moments where I've told myself, Luis, like this is definitely not something that is contributing or helping, and it definitely is making you feel more like shit. So this is probably
Mhm.
one of those limits and boundaries you have to set. And it's not so, and I struggle with it sometimes because I do think about it from the context of, these people like they work hard, they look great. I mean, should I really feel this way? And then I think about from the other context that oftentimes many of these folks are also struggling, right, in their own way. And I
Yeah.
see it, right, whether it's in the comments or whether it's in the even the captions they post, when I see someone that's showing off their body but still saying I have a lot of work to do, or I need to stop eating carbs, or I need to start going to the gym more, even though they look great to everyone else, right? But we're seeing them and it's clear. It is so clear that they're struggling with body image.
Yeah.
And, and then here I am sitting eating my donut and thinking, well, shit, if you look great and you're going through this, how am I supposed to feel? And I think a lot of my personal individual work in the last year has been really letting go of that and unlearning and embracing and accepting my body, which is not an easy task. It is, ongoing work and definitely still something that I deal with day to day. And yet, I think the difference for me from 5 years ago is that I'm no longer waiting to look a certain way, to express myself, to be myself, to live, to enjoy, rather I'm taking those things into consideration, right? I'm working on my movement. I'm working on, whatever, taking vitamins, the whole routine. And I'm also still living. I'm still dressing up the way that makes me feel good. I'm still buying outfits and
Right.
not seeing it as a waste of like, oh, what if I lose weight? What if I gain weight? But instead, you know what? Like I need to dress up for me because this is a part of me really nurturing a lot of those painful memories, right? That remind me of these moments where I didn't feel good enough and I don't want to feel that way anymore. So that has been something that has shifted for me. But it still gets hard, right? Going on social media, seeing
Mhm.
the highlight reel, which is really what it is, right? We don't see a lot of times people showing the reality, right? The pain that they're experiencing emotionally, or mentally sometimes when it comes to their bodies, when it comes to their relationship to food, when it comes to their, their hyper awareness around social standards and how people see them. I mean, these are things that you can't post on Instagram. We only see the highlight. And I think for me, that's something that I'm learning to also move away from is thinking in this way of, if I look this way, if I turned into this, I would have a better life, quote unquote. I think for me
Right.
it's moved away to like my life is going to be what I want it to be. And what I mean by that is
Hmm.
if I need to also be very conscious of how I'm choosing to live because I can't live in this fantasy world, right, of social media where everything looks perfect and in reality it's not. And so moving away from that has been definitely a lot of work. But I love what you were sharing as well about how we also have the power to take steps and to take care of ourselves. And it's okay
Hmm.
for us to not feel like we need to consume certain media or a constant barrage of images if it's really impacting us. Because the reality is that, social media is now the way to connect, right? It's just the
Hmm.
norm now. And we're all going to keep using it. We're going to keep finding out the outcomes of what it means to use it. Studies that haven't even like had results yet because it hasn't been around as long as it needs to. Younger generations also using it and we don't even know a lot of the impact. I mean, we know little things right here and there, but in terms of like long-term research, like social media has been around what, like maybe popularized like 10 years, maybe less than 10 years ago. I don't
Yeah. And then in each era of social media, it kind of changes what social media looks like, right? Like the era of MySpace is different than the era of Facebook, which is different than the era of Instagram and TikTok. Like it's always evolving what is expected of
Mhm.
you in social media. But like one thing I really have been thinking about is this idea of like masculine and being healthy, right? And
Mhm.
like what that really means. And I remember I was having a conversation with a friend and I was like, you know what? Like I'm so tired of like all these gym pictures. Like let's see a picture of you after therapy. Like let's
Mhm.
have that conversation honestly. And this is why I'm very vocal and honest about like the fact that I'm in therapy on social media because that's my gym picture. That's
Yeah.
me posting a picture of me in front of the mirror with my six pack
Mhm.
abs. It's saying I'm doing steps for my mental health so I can have self acceptance, self love, and self compassion. And I'm not sure everyone else is doing that. So, yeah, it's great you put in all this work into your body, but like you still hate yourself, right? Like you're still
Mhm.
struggling to meet these social norms and standards.
Yeah.
Like, literally, therapy is so beautiful. It is so important
Mhm.
for so many folks. And
Mhm.
I wish we were having that conversation more on social media.
Mhm.
Like, what are you doing for
Mhm.
your mental health? So you're not struggling with yourself. And it
Yeah.
goes into this idea that, like, this is how men show up. This is how we prove
Yes.
our strength is through our bodies and actually not through our emotional and behavioral health, you know?
Mhm.
And so I wish that that was more of the dialogue we're having on social media when it comes to
Mhm.
like flexing our health. It's like, great, your physical health looks amazing, but your mental health is shit. It's like, does it really mean anything?
Absolutely, yeah. For that is such a big topic that not many folks are really willing to have a conversation around because I think one, like I said, it's been reinforced by this idea, like you were speaking about earlier, that if you have a certain body, a certain presentation, there is privilege to that, right? People like your shit. People want to have sex with you. People want to connect with you, and yet it's almost become like this replacement, right, for everything else, right? Like this is the thing
Mm-hmm.
that will get me to whatever. And the reality, when I think a lot about mental health, is that many of us carry around these wounds, and we don't ever really slow down enough to be present with them, right? Because we're constantly setting so much on a lot of these surface level things, and it leaves us feeling this level of emptiness. I work with many gay men, and one of the things that I often hear is, that there is this almost expectation on themselves to show up a certain way, right? To be present a certain way. And yet they feel so disconnected from a lot of the people
Mm-hmm.
that they connect with. They feel so, alone in many ways, that because when it comes down to it, many of their gay friends are not able to hold space, right, for discussions around things like depression or anxiety, because many of them haven't had to, right? They've had to navigate
Yeah.
and survive in other ways. And mental health is still something I think that there, not only general population, there's still a lot of stigma and shame, but even for a lot of gay men, right, the mental health is just something that oftentimes is also seen in a very similar way, right? This is not important, or it's not something that I want to spend a lot of time in. And I think a lot of times it is harder than going to the gym. I've heard many of
Mm-hmm.
my gay friends tell me, like, you just need to go to the gym. That's therapy. That
That's gonna
that's
fix
gonna
everything.
that's gonna fix.
Endorphins, right? They always like it gets your endorphins going. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, that's the same thing I hear, the endorphins, and I'm like, okay, but is that, that's like every other simple, very quick solution, but is it like an actual pathway, right, to healing and to growth? And a lot of times I think it's just yeah, maybe it's just really, really difficult, right, to have to unpack a lot of these things, right, that we're experiencing. Like I said, many people don't talk about the pain that they're going through, unless they're making, like I said, these little comments, right, about their bodies or around feeling alone, right, and I think that there is also a lot of shame, right, especially for gay men to really learn and grasp the fact that they're also abiding by a lot of these harmful things that they were told, right? A lot of the
Yeah.
heteronormative things. Yeah, and so it's
Yeah.
hard. I think for me, it's hard to sit with that sometimes, thinking about how many folks, really emphasize more, this idea of the body, and that's the value. But then, everything else just seems to fall on the side.
And one thing, and this might switch topics, but I think they kind of intersect. One thing I've really been thinking about, obviously, we're seeing a lot of really hurtful and harmful ideologies being proposed about drag queens and
Mm-hmm.
trans folks and non binary folks. And what I always think about is the way that when people are progressive, we're so easy to other a more conservative idea and really vilify that idea and say like that's something I would never do or we would never
Mm-hmm.
do that,
Mm-hmm.
And I think about like the different ways that harm can be caused. Like yes,
Mm-hmm.
like proposing harmful legislation is obviously incredibly harmful.
Mm-hmm.
And also like well, even if we were to allow drag queens and trans folks and non-binary folks to be themselves, like, is our community really accepting of that? Like, is our
Mm-hmm.
community really ready to hold space for these individuals to
Mm-hmm.
be all that they are? And I'm not just
Mm-hmm.
talking about going to your Sunday brunch and throwing your tips
Mm-hmm.
at these queens. I'm talking about, like, are you actually holding space to create
Yeah.
a safe environment as queer folks for this marginalized
Mm-hmm.
sub community within our own community,
Yeah.
and so we as queer folks need to stop thinking that, we don't cause any harm. It's the
Mm-hmm.
Republicans, it's the
Mm-hmm.
legislators. It's like, no, we are also causing harm when we
Mm-hmm.
are not accepting of
Mm-hmm.
feminine men, of non-binary folks, when we're not understanding the,
Mm-hmm.
the trans experience, the drag queen
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
It we need to just stop, being against Republicans and legislation
Mm-hmm.
that's harmful because it makes us look better. We need to actually do
Yeah.
the work to actually show up
Yeah.
for our community. Because if
Mm-hmm.
not, we're no better. Again, we're playing that
Yeah.
thing of like middle school where it's like these Republicans are like the men that like are using their hands and their fists to hurt you. But
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of us are just using words,
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of our community isn't really safe anywhere.
Yeah, no, it's like clean up your own home first, right before you start cleaning
Yeah.
up like all these other messes.
Yeah.
And you're right. You're absolutely right. I remember seeing how even some folks in the community were trying to take out the trans, right, from LGBTQ, or they're trying to shift like this narrative, or almost like, separate, right, from
Mm.
these other folks because, of, a lot of the rhetoric, right, that's going around. And I mean, there are tons of queer folks that are also spewing the same shit, right? That are also,
Hmm.
talking about, supporting anti-trans, bills and things like that. I mean, I'm not saying that the majority are, but there are quite a few, and there are some people that, I've seen, at least on social media or even on the news, that do agree. And so, I mean, that definitely does exist.
Yeah, and I think like, kind of tying it back to the topic about like, and I think it's really the topic of like, how do you be your authentic self and also feel
Mm-hmm.
safe? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that even goes beyond queer lines,
Mm-hmm.
We are seeing so many different identities just show up as their authentic human self. And in not being safe. I'm thinking about
Mm-hmm.
Ralph Yarl, sorry. The recent
Mm-hmm.
shooting of the 16-year-old
Yeah.
black boy that was just going to a door, and it was just the wrong door. And I'm thinking about you like, where are we heading right now? Where it's really not safe to be yourself at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I speak of this with so
Mm-hmm.
much privilege, living in San Francisco, which yes is like a pretty safe city for someone like
Mm-hmm.
me, and
Mm-hmm.
yet like I still live in some of that anxiety, whether that's PTSD or like
Mm-hmm.
based in actual reality. I'm not really sure, but like, like I have my nails done right now and I have to think about like, are my clients gonna
Mm-hmm.
like, say something? Are my clients gonna have an opinion about that? Um,
Yeah.
and I walk down the street every day just as myself, and I'm always thinking like, will I be safe, you know? And I
Mm,
remember I had this conversation with someone that was more masculine presenting. They are gay, but they're very masculine, you know? And
mm-hmm,
they were telling me, you know, if someone gives you a hard time, you just need to like toughen up and like get in their face and
mm,
yell at them. And I called out their privilege and I said, you know, I think you're speaking from a great place of privilege where you come off very straight
yeah,
presenting and masculine. And if you were to yell at someone, they would probably be nervous or scared.
yeah,
No one's gonna take me seriously. I have
yeah,
I'm very feminine. You
yeah,
know by looking at me that I'm probably gay, you
mm-hmm,
know, and if some straight person or anyone is coming at me in a physical threat, they're not gonna
mm-hmm.
take me seriously. And so that's a very scary notion to live with, you know?
Absolutely, that is terrifying. I feel the same way. I mean, there's many times where I walk down the street and I definitely think about that. I was reading a report from UCLA and how they were talking about how, LGBTQ plus folk experience higher levels of violence. And I often thought, like, I think as I was reading it, like, how many of these folks were folks that didn't present? Right.
Mm-hmm.
In these like, what is it? Kind of cisgender, like, heteronormative kind of ways, right? Where they're masculine looking,
Right.
or some maybe a lesbian that is very feminine presenting, versus like queer folks who are not, right? Who show up in the way that they want to present themselves, and I sat with that because I think for me what was coming up was how many of these folks that are experiencing this violence are non-binary, are trans, are folks who are feminine? And, I think in my head, I knew the answer. Obviously, it's probably a higher percentage. And so there
Mm-hmm.
is privilege in that, right? There is a lot of privilege. And, I've heard the same thing as well, from friends or just people in general, like, well, you just need to, act tough or dress a certain way and, be more masculine. And me sitting there thinking like, that's not who I am. That's not how I show
Mm-hmm.
up in the world. And having to be afraid because I don't, right? That's not me. That, I mean, it's terrifying. It's also, belittling. It also makes me feel like I need to change once again for other people to feel like, they can exist with me, right? Rather than them not turning to violence, not turning to, verbal violence. And so it is very scary. It's something that I think the more and more I go through it, I've had to really shift my coping strategies and even work through a lot of it. There were moments where I couldn't go anywhere without my partner because it just felt really scary to me. He's more
Yeah.
masculine presenting. That's just who he is. And for me, there was a real fear in even going to get my car at night, right? Because here I was, in my little side bag or whatever, or my shoes that I now don't wear like masculine shoes, because I don't like them. I wear what I wear and
Yeah.
that's how I like to just show up. And that fear of, shit, am I gonna walk out and someone's gonna see me and be like, oh, make a comment, come over to me,
Mm-hmm.
say something, and it is really scary. And I don't think that many people talk about that either, how it's not just scary, but it also fucks with your mental health, right? It makes you
Yeah.
constantly feel like you're not safe. And for the most part, I mean, it's true. I mean, it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we need to stop thinking we're living in, and I don't really know what people mean by this when they mean
Mhm.
like, you know, at this point in America, things were better. I don't really know what period they're talking about. But anyways, we need to stop thinking we're living in this time where like, just because we are having more conversations about being queer, about being feminine,
Mhm.
that's more accepting. That's not true. Just
Mhm.
because we're having more conversations about it doesn't mean that we are accepting of it. You know, our
Mhm.
country is really at this point
Mhm.
where we're progressing in some ways
Mhm.
and we're regressing in a
Mhm.
lot of ways.
Mhm.
And so I think it is okay to acknowledge that
Yeah.
there is a lot of fear running around right now, and that fear is
Mhm.
actually really valid. You know, like I said earlier, look at legislation, also look at our streets, look at our own
Mhm.
communities, look at what's
Mhm.
happening. You know, people that are even in this own queer community don't even agree with each other. You
Yeah.
know, how can legislation or legislators agree on what policies are going to work for us?
Yeah.
And so I think I hate to say this, but I think at times we have to acknowledge that fear and
Mm-hmm.
utilize it to keep our
Mm-hmm.
safety there,
Mm-hmm.
because that acknowledgement that I may be in danger is what got me through middle school. It's
Yeah.
what got me through now. And I'm not saying live your life in hypervigilance and like don't express who you
Mm-hmm.
are, but there's a reason we are allowed to experience fear as humans.
Mm-hmm.
It's primal and it's important because we need people to acknowledge our surroundings and adjust, And I
Mm-hmm.
hope we can live in a world one day where we are not required to adjust too much of
Yeah.
ourselves. But
Yeah.
I think right now in 2023, it would be foolish of us to think I can just walk around how I want to and be okay. That's just
Yeah.
unfortunately not where we're at. And,
Yeah.
it's important to build those safety tactics.
Very, very true. I completely agree. And I just want to say I don't want to discourage anyone out there who is wanting to be seen and show up and be themselves, because I know that that is such a crucial part of us existing in this world, and it also is a big part of our healing. I think, like you said, Jesse, right? The fear is an innate thing that we all have, right? And it's there for a reason. It serves a purpose. And so just being cautious, right? Just making sure that we're taking
Mm-hmm.
care of ourselves. And also to piggyback off what you were saying with change, I definitely know that there's been improvement, right? I mean, we hear stories all the time from our elders, our queer elders who share about how things were before. There is progress, and we're definitely seeing this process happening right now where there is a lot of challenge, a lot of folks pushing back, but it's because there's progress that's being made. People are
Yeah.
pushing back because they're seeing, they're afraid, they're realizing that things really are changing. And that's scary for,
Mm-hmm.
for folks who don't understand or who don't take the time to really educate themselves, or who, spew all of this generational hate and ignorance without actually like working, or understanding, or knowing the queer community. And so I do think that a lot of the reasons why things are getting ugly is because we are seeing that there is a lot of pushback happening, and that is necessary. I think in any movement, that people who have been in power, who have had privilege, who have had that safety, will fight against something that doesn't feel, that is threatening to them, right? Which to
Mm-hmm.
them. And so I do see that as movement. I do see that we are talking more about it. I do see that it is present. There is hope. And also at the
Yeah.
same time, you're right. The reality is that it's not always going to be safe. It's not always going
Mm-hmm.
to be so black and white. And there is a
Mm-hmm.
long, long way for us to go, and especially for queer folks who identify as trans or non-binary, right? This is where we're needed right now, right? To really support and help and be there for, our siblings in this community. And, I think that's where we also have to recognize, like we were talking about, how other queer folks or other folks in the community can also cause harm.
Mm-hmm.
And the harm is caused not just by the actions, but even by the ignoring, right? By the neglecting, by the not showing up, which does happen too. Right. I mean, that is also harm. If we are part of the LGBTQ plus community and we're not showing up for everyone, and we're not supporting and really being present, then, we're alienating. We're doing the same shit that many of us experience as gay men, other folks in the LGBTQ plus community. So I think it's so important for us to recognize that too, that harm isn't just by taking direct action or our thoughts or what we say. It's also by ignoring and straight out just, taking the fact that maybe some movement has happened for gay men, but and leaving everyone else behind, because that is what we
Mm-hmm.
see. That a lot of the progress, a lot of the stuff that has been more presented in terms of representation, in terms of legal rights, has been for mostly gay men.
Yeah.
uh, so something to think
Yeah.
about.
And I think that is something we really need to have like this open dialogue about, like who is feeling safe? Why are they feeling safe? And maybe
Hmm.
not other demographics are feeling safe. And then really look at the progress we have made and who is that progress marketed towards,
Hmm.
because it's definitely not progress for all.
Hmm.
And, there are
Hmm.
reasons why, especially within the trans community, the Black trans community, we still
Mm-hmm.
have a very high death rate,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a conversation that we're
Yeah.
really not talking about,
Mm-hmm.
is the amount of Black trans, especially women, that are being murdered every single
Mm-hmm.
day on the streets
Mm-hmm.
of the US.
Yeah.
And so, and again, because they're showing up as their authentic selves, and
Yeah.
that is scary to people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so we need to have an open dialogue around how do we show up for one another, and how
Mm-hmm.
do we make each other feel safe, not just physically
Yeah.
but emotionally as well. Because
Yeah.
like I said, they may have their guns, but over here we have a lot of words, we have a lot
Mm-hmm.
of words we like to spew and say. And so we can't just fight for queer people to stay alive for us to
Mm-hmm.
harm them with our words. We
Mm-hmm.
need to make sure queer people are staying alive, and that they have
Yeah.
places to go to celebrate who they are and feel okay
Yeah.
with that.
Exactly. And that, we're including everyone because, you used the word earlier and it just really stuck with me. You said marketed. And that's what it feels like, right? Because so many queer stories from Black and brown folks that go unspoken, that go unshared, the credit isn't given where it's
Mm-hmm.
due. And we see this highlight of basically, gay white men, right? That represent a lot of times what people see as queer or who's getting the benefits, right? Or even representation in media. And so I think that's so important. You're saying who are the ones benefiting from it? How are they benefiting from it? And also, how are we going to stop continuing to dismiss the reality, right? That queer folks of color have been a foundation, have been at the forefront, have been the ones dying, right, for these rights. I mean, you just mentioned right now and the absolute truth that we are seeing majority trans folks of color, trans women of color being killed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just, yeah, it just feels so yucky to me. And I think that's why it's so important for, us and all of us in the queer community to realize that we also contribute to these things in one way or another and question these biases that we also hold and where they came from and how they're causing us harm and how they're still rooted in heteronormativity and patriarchal systems and all this religious stuff, right? I mean, all these other different systems, right, that we live under and we do experience, because they affect us. That's just the world we live
Mm-hmm.
in. Um, so.
Yeah, and I think this again ties into that conversation we're having around like physical health and mental health. It's that exact same conversation. We need to keep each other physically alive, but we also need to keep each other
Mhm.
mentally alive and emotionally okay and secure and grounded. And it's and I think because sometimes we think, oh, as long as we just, make sure that no one's dying, that they'll be okay. And it's like, well, that's
Mhm.
not really how it works. Like, you can
Yeah.
be alive and still feel so empty and like you're dead inside if you're not having a proper support system, if you're not getting proper access to basic health rights, if you're not having friends and family that are accepting of you, then
Mhm.
what really is life if you're just all alone? And so, I hope that's the dialogue we kind of continue to
Yeah.
have moving forward, as far as showing up as our authentic selves and feeling
Mhm.
safe, is
Mhm.
that safety is not just physical, it's also emotional.
Absolutely. And I hope to, all the queer folks out there who are listening, whether you identify as a gay man or, trans or bisexual, whatever, or how you express yourself, that we start to really support, appreciate, and love one another, that we are literally on this boat together. And just because, some movement has been done for more other groups more so than others does not mean that we leave each other behind. And I think it's so crucial that we understand that the world in a lot of ways has rejected, continues to reject and pushes back. And we have each other. I mean, at the end of the day, we really do just have each other right now. I mean, we have allies,
Mm-hmm.
of course, wonderful people that are doing work, but understanding our experiences, understanding, the things that we go through, and really a lot of the historical part, like we have each other. There's a history that ties us all in together. From the very first moment where there was, the fight, right? The outrage, all of this started to now to a lot of what we're pushing. We need to be there for one another. So I do hope that people think about the way that they're showing up within the queer community and how much they're including, supporting, and loving, everyone within the community.
hmm And I think like my kind of final thought on this is it also all starts from inside, from within. If you are not loving yourself, I
Mm,
mean, as RuPaul says, like you're not going to be able to love anyone else. And so, so much of this is rooted in the relationship you have with yourself. You know,
mhm,
if you're critiquing, if you're judging, if you are not
mm,
accepting of people that are different than you
mhm.
need to take a hard look inside on what is causing that.
Yes.
Where did that rhetoric come from?
Mm,
And how can you challenge those ideas? How can you better yourself? Because when you better yourself, you're going to better the people around you. You know, we
yeah.
have to acknowledge those biases, those
Mhm,
prejudices that we have, and that's how we're
mhm.
going to create change. We're not going to start being
Yeah.
accepting and being kind to people that are different if we're not
Mhm.
doing that internal self work. So, like I said, post those pictures after your therapy session. Like, let's start seeing it out. Let's start getting
Yeah.
momentum on like where is that internal work you are doing because that is what's going to
Yes.
create change.
Yes,
So that's
yes,
kind of my final thought on that.
yes. Go to therapy, y'all. You doesn't have to be
Yeah,
something wrong, or we don't have to assume. I mean, this is
right.
about growth and healing. And I love what you just said, the
Yeah.
internal work. That shit is hard, and it means having to unpack and slow down and be present. And I know that shit is scary, but it's so crucial and necessary, right? If you're finding yourself, just like Jesse said, hating and feeling angry and judging yourself and others, there's a lot to unpack there. These are not things that we are born with. These are things we are taught. This is shit that's thrown on us, and it's okay, right, to do this work as part of healing. It is ongoing. We are all going to have biases. I have biases. Everyone does. And it's not about having them. It's about how we're learning to be better people and how we're learning to navigate this world that it's pretty fucking tough, and pretty hard
Yeah.
some days and sometimes, to exist in it. So
hmm
I go to therapy.
Yeah, right. That's our ending. Go to therapy, you know. But it's not a bad suggestion. It's really not a bad
Yeah.
suggestion at all. Therapy has done wonders for me. So I think it
Me
does
too.
wonders for a lot of people. So
Yes,
yeah, and,
absolutely.
and like you said, I think there's nothing wrong with admitting that you hold those, you know.
Mhm.
I think that's one of the most important first steps you can take is just acknowledging you hold these biases.
Yeah.
So just know that
Yeah.
that's okay and that's actually human. It doesn't make you a
Exactly.
bad person.
Exactly. Jesse, thank you so much for joining me. You're definitely invited to come back. I always love our
Yes.
conversations, and you're so wise. And, I know you're doing this work out in the community. So thank you for taking the time to be here. I am going to be sharing your info in the little section, the bio section and everything. And
Mhm.
please send us that link for that book so we can share with people too.
Yes.
Uh,
I'll share. I bought it at a local bookshop and it was like kind of the only
okay.
one there, but I'll see if I can find an online link for it and then I'll send that your way. So,
Awesome. Awesome. So yeah,
yeah.
you're going to see the link on there. Hopefully I'll find it on some website so I can make it a little bit easier for you to find, but pick up some of the, pick up this book specifically. It definitely sounds like a great book. I'm going to be picking it up, yeah, learn, right? Be open. I
hmm
hope that this conversation has helped in some way or at least inspired you in some way. And once again, thank you so much for being here and listening to the Queer Magic Podcast.